Okay, now we're going to look at number 3. And you notice if you go to the highest exponent term, it's x to the 4th. So the general shape when it's a positive x to the 4th is going to be kind of this little shape like this. So kind of a general thing to follow. It's going to end up something like that. Okay? But both end behaviors on both sides are going to be going up infinitely is the key thing. If it was a negative x to the 4th, it'd kind of be going the other direction. Kind of that thing flipped down. Okay? So we need to make a table. Okay? And I'll start at -3, and we're going to have 32. At -2, we're going to have 1. Okay? At -1, it's 2. At 0, if we put 0 in here, it's going to be at 5. Okay, so again, you have to plug these in, and I'd have to do, all these values to the 4th, plus to the 3rd, minus 3x squared, plus 5, putting them all in. And you can do that on your calculators. At 0, we're at 5. At 1, we're at 4. At 2, we're at 17. At 3, we're at 86. So this is where it starts to shoot up really far on the right-hand side. All right, so let's go down and actually look at these. So at -3, we're up at 32, which is off my grid. So that's where the end behavior, is way up here. Okay, at -2, we're at 1. So we're not quite down to our 0 yet. So basically what happens here is this shoots up really fast. That's the end behavior shooting up really fast. And at -1, we're at 2. So at -1, we're at 2. Now, we have to really look at what goes on between -2 and 1 because this graph is actually going to get below the x-axis between -2 and -1 a little bit and then come back up. And I'll put some decimals in a second, but let's graph our other points. At 0, we're at 5. Okay, at 1, we're at 4, so now it's starting to come back down again. At 2, we're at 17, so we're going to be way up here. Okay, so from this, it's going to come up, it's going to come back down, and then at 2, we're going to be way up at 17 again. So it kind of comes up and goes like that. So you can kind of see kind of that W shape to the graph. Now I'm going to try some decimals in between -2 and -1. So let's go like -1.7. So if I plug -1.7 in, and again, I'm not going to show you on the calculator here, but you'd have to do -1.7 to the 4th, plus -1.7 to the 3rd, minus 3 times -1.7 squared. Make sure you're putting it in parentheses now when you're using a calculator, and then plus 5. You should get about -0.23 approximately. Let's try and put in -1.5. I'm just trying a couple decimals in between. We get about -0.06. So if I went to the nearest tenth, this would be about -0.2, and this would be about -0.1. So kind of our lowest point is going to be right here. So at -1.7, we are at -0.2, so -0.2. So at -1.7, we're just a little bit below the x-axis. And then at -1.5, we're barely below the x-axis. So it comes down here and goes back up and then joins this other part of the graph. So it comes down like this, comes back up. A little hard to graph there. I can't make that, well, I guess I could make it a little bit bigger here. Okay, so now we're going to identify our, so this thing actually comes down right here below at -1.7 and then comes back up again. So it's actually going to cross in 2 different spots. A little bit to the left of -2 and then a little bit further that way. Okay, so it has 2 zeros, and the zeros are 2 real zeros, and the zeros are, we're going to say about -1.8, because remember at -1.7 we were just barely below at -0.2 about. Okay, so we're going to say it's about -1.8, And we're going to say a little bit to the right of that, so maybe about negative 1.5 approximately. And do remember, these are approximations, but it does go a little bit below and come back up, so they're going to be, zeros are going to be pretty close to each other there. Okay, now we need to do relative minimum and maximums. Okay, so this thing's going to have two relative minimums. Okay, it's going to have right here and right here. Okay, so relative min is negative 1.7, okay, and negative 0.2. So it's really this value right here is a relative min. Now, it also has a relative min right here, and that is at 1, 4. Okay, now it might not be exactly 1, you know, it might be a little bit before 1, but we'll say approximately. And then the max, relative max, is kind of where this turns and goes back down right here. So you see how it kind of turns and goes back down, so that's at 0, 5. Okay.